Welcome to the Half-Load Report. Here we dive deep into recent Demigod news, upcoming presents books, questions only Jason has an answer to, and all of our things writing. I'm Samuel, your co-host. And unfortunately, my co-host Diego isn't here. But it's okay, because who we do have here today is Rebecca Roanhorse, author of the upcoming Rick Riordan Presents imprint book, Race to the Sun, based on Navajo mythology. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for doing this with us. We're so grateful to have you on the podcast and excited for this.
Oh, well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
So, jumping right into the first question, Rebecca, you've written numerous books before, including Star Wars Resistance Reborn. How does Race to the Sun differ from your previous books?
Well, it is my first middle grade novel, so it is my first book for this age group. And of course, I got to work with Uncle Rick. He was one of the editors. We have a big sort of overall editor, but Rick definitely gave his input and especially the first half of the story. So that was definitely an experience that was very different.
Yeah, how was it to your first time working on a middle grade novel, to get to work with someone like Rick Riordan? What was that sort of experience doing something like that for the first time, but also doing it with someone who's such an expert or powerhouse in the field?
Yeah, so it was great. I mean, obviously, like if you're going to learn something, it's, awesome to learn from the best, which I feel like that's one of the opportunity that I got. So yeah, I feel like, and especially I really write action adventure stories, and, even my other stories pull from, traditional stories or mythologies, or however you want to call them. And so it was just really a great fit for me. And then to have Rick and Stephanie, who is the other editor, sort of guide me through the process. It was very lucky. I'm very lucky.
Yeah. So that sounds awesome, but how did you get the sort of opportunity to do that? Did they reach out to you? Did you have to reach out to them? How did you get to do that?
Yeah, well, they reached out to me actually. So when they started the Rick Riordan Presents imprint, they sent out sort of, sort of a invitation to authors from different cultural backgrounds who were writers, who might be interested in writing a story for them. And then Stephanie contacted my agent in particular because she was familiar with my other work and asked if I was interested in writing a story. And I have a daughter who is now 12, and I guess at the time was probably 10. And she was like, you have to write a story. Mostly, I think, because she wanted to meet Rick. But definitely, it was a great fit.
Yeah. So you said that your daughter, she was really happy for you and asked you to do this so she could meet Uncle Rick. But how did you feel personally? Had you heard about Rick Riordan? Had you read some of his books before?
Oh yeah, well of course. I mean, I think everyone's heard of Rick Riordan, but yeah, and I had read Percy Jackson. I'd seen the movie, so don't judge. I was familiar, with the story, and I'd read the Magnus Chase novels. And so, yeah, I was definitely interested. Like I said, I hadn't really thought about writing for middle grade before, but it was such a great opportunity. And like I said earlier, this opportunity also not just to write the book, but to learn from, one of the best in the field, and to make my daughter happy. It just all sort of fell into place. It just worked really well.
Yeah, that sounds great. So so you got to work with Rick Riordan. Um, what was the most surprising thing when you got to meet him and you got to work with him as an editor?
Well, meeting him, I think the most surprising thing is he really is as nice as he seems to be online or, in interviews. He's just very down to earth. He's a great listener. He wants to hear like about your life and your stories. A lot of people with, Rick's level of fame would just be like, me, me, me. Let me talk about me. But he's not that way at all. He's very chill. And then I think, as an editor, he's very precise. He knows what works. He knows, what kids want. And, sort of, I guess, like, I think when adults read, they bring all this, like, backstory of their lives to books, and kids don't necessarily have all that experience and backstory. So they're looking for you to fill that in. That's your job as a storyteller, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably the biggest transition, I think, for me as a writer was, hey, you can't just assume everybody knows what you're talking about. You have to tell them what you're talking about. And that was really cool. I mean, that's a skill that I can now take on and use, in my other work as well. But I think Rick really taught me that one.
Awesome. And so, moving away from that a little bit, so in Rick Riordan Presents, books are about mythology, and you're writing about Navajo mythology. How did you? I know you learned about this a bit in college, as I heard, I think, in your interview with Rick on readriordan.com. But how did you sort of do more research than just what you did in college, and also? It's just pick which myths that you wanted to include in the book and which could fit into the plot well.
Yeah. So that's right. Not in college, but in law school. So I guess that is sort of college. But I learned about traditional Navajo stories in law school because I took a class in Navajo law, and they actually use their traditional stories in the formation of their law. So law on the Navajo Nation, which is sort of its own separate legal entity. They don't follow it's in the Four Corners area. So I'll talk a little bit about this for folks who don't know. So it sort of straddles New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. And while they are a part of each of those states, they are also their own sort of independent jurisdiction. So they have their own law, they have their own government, all of that sort of stuff. And so if you're going to practice law on the Navajo Nation, you have to learn their specific kind of law. And that's what I did. I lived on the Navajo Nation for a couple of years with my now in-laws because my husband is Navajo. So I married into a big Navajo family. And so that was really... that's my family. Those are the people I love most in the world. Those are the stories that really resonate with me and I get excited about. And so the Hero Twins, which is really sort of what inspired Race to the Sun, is sort of a foundational hero story in Navajo mythology. And it's out there. You can find it in comic books. There's a number of Navajo authors who have taken it up. You can find it in other books that are a little more, I guess, sort of cultural anthropology type books. But it's a pretty well-known story. You can find it in art and paintings and all sorts of things like that. And so that just seemed right. That seemed like the story to start with. And of course, it's its own action-adventure story in and of itself. So it's sort of a perfect fit.
Wow. So you said that that's a good place to start off on. Does this mean that sort of Race to the Sun might branch off into sequels that explore more myths that maybe didn't get to be touched on in this book?
Right now, we do not have plans for a sequel. This was a one-shot story. But, never say never. We'll see.
Right. But would you like to do a sequel?
Gosh, I don't know. Like I said, I would never say never. And one of the ideas in the book that I set up was this ancestor club where kids got together, sort of an after-school club, and talked about their own cultural traditions. And so there's a lot of different natives, not just Navajos, in the ancestor club because the characters go to an all-native school, sort of like a charter school.
Mm-hmm.
For Native kids. And so it's possible. I think you could sort of branch out from that and tell some really cool stories. But no plans right now.
Okay. Um, so I guess diving a bit deeper into the actual story itself, your main character, Nozomi, could you maybe tell us a little bit about her and also maybe how she relates to you?
Sure. So Najoni Begay is her name, and she is a sort of typical seventh grader in Albuquerque, New Mexico. um, I think she really wants to be popular. She wants to fit in. She's trying to find ways to do that. But unfortunately, all her sort of plans fail. She's got anger management issues. She's had to change schools because she can't get along with people. She tries to be popular in sports and completely blows it. She really didn't have a lot of friends because of her issues. But she's got a good heart, and she loves her little brother, who's sort of a pain, though. Yeah, this is sort of her story about how she finds out, who she is, and maybe popularity isn't everything, and heroes aren't made the way you think heroes are. And yeah, that's kind of her deal. How does she relate to me? Well, I do not have anger management issues that I know of. But I think sort of, one of the things that Najoni is missing in the story is her mom. And a lot of, her reasons for who she is and how she acts is because her mom left her when she was little. And so I really resonate with that. I am adopted, so my mom was not around when I was little until I was adopted, of course. But I definitely felt like that was something I wanted to explore, something that was sort of a serious issue that I know a lot of kids probably deal with, whose parents go missing or who miss out of their lives, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then, finding your own way, finding your path that might not be what everybody else's path is, but realizing it's the right one for you.
Yeah. Moving on a bit besides Nozomi, there are characters in this book like Mac and Davery, and probably others that we don't know enough about yet. What character is probably your personal favorite of this book, would you say, and why?
Gosh, yeah, I love them all. Of course, those are my babies. But I relate to Davery a lot. He's Najoni's best friend, and he's half Black and half Navajo. And I am half Black and half Okewenge, which is the tribe my mother is from, which is like a neighboring tribe of Navajo. We're in New Mexico, very close by. But anyway, so I really relate to that, and sort of being from two different cultures, and how you fit into that. He's also very bookish. He loves to read. He's not a nerd per se. He's just a reader, and he's smart. And he often has to pull Nozomi back from her more sort of radical ideas and stuff. He keeps her grounded, I guess. And so I really relate to that. I relate to the reading part, and especially, I think, yeah.
As you said, most books, they have an editing process, and Rick and Stephanie helped you with that. Were there any scenes or chapters or characters or that were in this book in earlier drafts that you were sort of didn't really work with the story, but like were upsetting to cut out because you liked them so much?
Trying to remember. I don't think so. They give you a lot of freedom. Definitely it was, the process is, okay, tell us what you want to write, and you write out a outline, usually pretty long. I think probably like 10 pages or something. Here's the story I want to write. And then, gave some sample pages. Here's my writing style. This is, what the story will look like. And then they're like, sounds good, write us a book. When you're done, send it in and we'll take a look, sort of thing. And there was nothing really specific I can think of that didn't work. We definitely did a lot of fine tuning of scenes. And Stephanie is great at like filling in plot holes. Like sometimes you have an idea and it just doesn't resolve itself, or there's a lot of what ifs. And so she's great at spotting those and making suggestions about how to fix them. But there's no characters. I pretty much knew the characters I wanted, and how it was all going to play out from the beginning. So I did a lot of planning beforehand. Some writers don't, but I definitely do most of the time. Yeah, so it's a pretty smooth process actually, but intense, super intense.
Nice. Um, so how do you envision this book impacting kids who read it?
Oh, wow. Well, I think the biggest thing for me, and one of the biggest reasons I wrote it, besides my daughter, is well, and actually she's part of that, I guess. I wrote it so that Native kids could see themselves as heroes and could see their stories and their culture and history centered in an action adventure novel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like, oh, we're reading about the past, or, sort of we're set in the 1800s, the sort of cowboys and Indians type era we get all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a contemporary story, right now, because there's Native kids right now, thousands of them out there who never really get to see themselves in a story like this. And so that was really my main goal. And then definitely along with that is non-native kids who get to read this and be like, oh, I never knew, like I think they did a study recently that like 40% of Americans think that all Native Americans are dead. And so, if this book can reach some of those people, some of those kids, and they're like, oh, look, there's this vibrant, living, exciting culture with its own mythologies that are really cool. And, it's out here right now. It's not in the 1800s. Then that's awesome too.
Mm. Was there anything that you were specifically sort of thinking about related to that when you were writing the book?
You mean like as far as the representation is concerned?
Yeah, but just who you wanted to read the book, I guess. But that too.
Oh gosh. Oh, I want everyone to read the book. The more the better, right? But yeah, I think I think everyone. I think the book is for everyone. Like I said, I think Native kids might get something a little different out of it than non-Native kids, but I think what non-Native kids get out of it is just as important because they get to see an Indigenous story told by an Indigenous author, but it's still fun. I mean, there's still hot Cheetos, there's still, flaming arrows, there's still, giant birds that you get to ride and, go on this, adventure through the sacred mountains of Navajo. And so it's just, a lot of fun, hopefully, story.
Yeah. Flaming Cheetos and flying birds. So
What else do you want?
you got a lot of information about DeNeige from your personal experience in law school and also just being Native American yourself, but not DeNeige. But you did mention that your husband and his family is DeNeige. Was there a way that that side of the family particularly impacted the story, would you think, or even just gave you suggestions for the book?
Yeah, so of course, DeNeige is another way to say Navajo. I don't know if we made that clear, if people know that. But DeNeige is what Navajo folks call themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so Navajo is like an imposed name on them. But it is sort of the official name of the nation and the government, and people use them sort of interchangeably. So I sort of use them interchangeably too. But gosh, it's hard to say where, if there was anything particular or where influences begin and end. But I think certainly being part of a big Navajo family for the past 15 odd years makes all the difference in the world. I don't think I, be confident, to take on a story like this without them and without, sort of that experience and influence of just day to day living on the Navajo Nation. And, sort of surrounded by Navajo culture and language and everything else. I mean, they are integral to who I am. And so they definitely influence, the book that I wrote.
Nice. So, Diego, this just in, he is asking me to ask how you came up with the character names.
Yeah. So, Nojone is a Navajo word, and it means beauty. And so that is a really important concept in Navajo culture. You often tell people to walk in beauty, and that means, sort of live a balanced life. A beautiful life. And it is also a girl's name. I actually have a niece named Nojone. And so that's where I got the idea for her name. Davery, my daughter, came up with. We wanted a name that was, not too typical, like something sort of interesting. We were kind of throwing around, obviously, a Dave and an Avery. And so she came up with Davery. And Mac, his name is Marcus. And I have a number of friends, Navajo friends named Marcus. So I thought, hey, that sounds like a good Navajo name. So we just picked that one.
That sounds fun. So those are pretty much all our questions. So just thank you so much for doing this interview with us. And we are looking forward to reading the Race to the Sun, which comes out January 14th.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I hope everybody checks out the book and they enjoy it. And, grab yourself a bag of hot Cheetos and then settle in.
All right. Thanks again. And that's it for this episode of the Half-Blood Report. You might be wondering, how can you contact this podcast? Well, you can tweet at us with compliments, questions, corrections, or suggestions at Half Report. You can also find us on Instagram at The Half-Blood Report or email at us at our website, thehalfbloodreport.com. That said, it's time for our credits. Our theme music is actually by my wonderful co-host, Diego. I do most of our editing, and our recording equipment is on loan from William Bachman. I'm Samuel, and usually we have our co-host Diego on here. This is The Half-Blood Report podcast, the only HBR that matters. Survive till next week.
I'm Rebecca Roanhorse, author of Race to the Sun, and I never listen to the Half-Blood Report.